everybody, to another episode of Marketing, Management, and Money. I'm Ethan Miliori, and along with Ryan Murray, who I call the super hosts.
Feels good. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, you do all the work behind the scenes, so I get to just enjoy it. So
there is some truth to that. Not all the work.
That's why you get paid the big bucks, and I get paid.
I haven't seen your check or my check, but sometimes you feel like
you've got more checks than I have.
That is true, but you do feel like podcasting can be a labor of love at times.
Yeah, but it's fun.
It is fun. I do enjoy it, and I shouldn't totally downplay it, because this is actually we're getting into peak season for trainings and whatnot. It's very interesting. Trainings follow the same pattern as personal training. So
really?
Yeah. So
that's
if you
nice.
look
You're
at the
probably right,
the market cycles. So first of the year, everyone has a New Year's resolution, and so I'm always a lot busier the first of the year with people wanting to book trainings. Like this week alone, I booked 5. And so, yeah, you get into July, I book 0. So, if anyone out there is looking for a discount, July, that is a discount month. But, and then it picks back up in September, because after summer, kids go back to school, everyone either wants to get in shape or they want to do something with their small business. And it kind of cracks me up that, every January through March is busy. September, October is busy. Yeah. And so anyway, there you go. Well, I don't know that I had anything to do with anything.
Yeah. If anyone else is looking to get into this, now they know the secret. So today, I had read a couple of articles and shared some with you on the topic of holding people accountable. Mm-hmm. But I always hate that word accountable because it's so authoritarian.
Yes.
And so as we talked, it says, I want to do an episode where we talk about holding people accountable, but in a healthy way, right? So that you're not getting into that authoritarian where it's my way, the highway, because you can do a lot of damage if and accountability has to happen. And if it's done right, it just goes natural.
To an extent, it goes natural. I do think that if you don't have any, if you're so laid back, then, it's not going to take care of itself. You're not going to wake up one day and be a superstar. Like, you have to have some discipline. And
so with holding people accountable, I don't want to go down the delegation one, because we've done episodes on delegating and things like that. You can go and look back up. But you can't take that out of it as well, right? Because that's part of it, is if you're going to hold someone accountable, you've obviously delegated tasks, responsibilities, and that's an interesting one. As some of the stuff I was reading, it was bringing out the fact that accountability and responsibility are two different things.
Yeah.
Even though they have this crossover, meaning if I ask someone to be accountable, the project can go horribly wrong, and they can just report back, this is why it went wrong.
Right.
That was accountability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Responsibility, on the other hand, could have been you were responsible to make sure the project didn't fail, and it did fail. So you had a responsibility there, even though the accountability says, well, this is why it failed. Mm-hmm. The responsibility doesn't abnegate you from that responsibility. That having to do something proactive there. Yeah.
So can we do story time? I like story time.
Most of your stories are entertaining, so please.
Well, this one's not going to be super entertaining, but I feel like it illustrates a point really well. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can see that I do marketing, management, money, but I also am with a company, and I oversee their sales, marketing, and product development. And so with this company, it's first of the year, everyone's talking goals, and so we just had our first department meeting. And so I got everyone together, and I put the agenda out there. And the bottom agenda item was I put 2024 goals, and then I put a laughing face emoji, because it's like we don't look at goals as, like normal 2024 or New Year's resolutions or anything like that. And so we got into the meeting, we covered the business that we needed to cover, and I said, okay, guys, I was messing around, I was trying to put some humor into this, and that's why I put, the smiley emoji, but I also want to ask you guys, do you want, as a department head, do you want me to put goals down for you? And they all looked at me and they're just like, no, we don't. And I actually said, okay, I don't want to put goals down for you. I want you guys to have goals for yourself, but for various reasons. Now, I'm not saying that goals are bad, but in our department, I always like to look at what's within your control and what's out of your control.
Right.
And most people, and this is where you were talking about, accountability and responsibility. Most people, they set these goals that are completely outside of someone's control. Like you think, okay, we're going to have a goal where we're going to increase sales by 15%. Based on what? Is the market going to change 15%? Do we have new products that we're going to introduce that are going to increase sales 15%? Are we going to grow our customer base by 15%? Like, where is this coming from? And a lot of companies fail to actually connect that 15% growth to any action steps. And so I would much rather say, okay, if I'm going to set a 2024 goal, and the reason why I don't like 2024 goals or New Year's goals is because it's so hard to line anything up with a year. Most things, it's like, what are we going to do for the next 4 months? Or, because it goes through cycles. So,
well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an important part about when you think of accountability is when you talk about cycles, having your goals that are based off of like a calendar year may not be the right way to do that, because your cycles may dictate that we really should be July 1 through the end of June, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to look at your business cycle when you start talking about this, and we'll talk a bit more about this as we talk more today, but that's important to recognize the cycle of your business and then try to build it off of that, because you'll find that it will be a smoother process and you'll have better growth.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, for this department meeting, we know that this is a busy time of year for us, but we also know that the cycle of the business, it takes months. The actions that we take today, we don't see the fruits of those actions for months. Right. It could be 6 months, it could be longer. And so, right now sales are up, but they're always up this time of year, and they're up based on things that happened last year. And so if I start holding people accountable for January sales, and I'm like, okay, here we are, we're already the middle of January. What are you guys going to do? Nothing. There is nothing that anyone on my team can do to change January sales. I mean, they can do some stuff to really sabotage it, but they can't grow January sales because that work's already been done. When you're out picking the peaches, you didn't plant the tree in, September 1st and you're picking the peaches on September 12th.
Right.
Like you planted the tree a decade earlier. Now, did you water it properly? Did you prune it in the spring like you were supposed to? Did it get the fertilizer that it needed? By the time you're getting that harvest, it's too late to fertilize. Like I can't go and fertilize it and then expect to harvest the next day. So, I'll get off all my country wisdom and let you.
Well, you talked about people, and I like that because one of the points I want to talk about is leaders when we hold people accountable. The one that we have to be, and I think we feel like pay attention to it, that we really need to, is do we have the right people on the right seat in the bus, right? Mm-hmm. Do we have the right people on the team doing the right tasks? And that falls on us as a responsibility as a leader, because too often we want to hold those people accountable, but yet we've positioned them wrong, and then we want to hold them accountable. So I think it's important that when we really are stepping back and saying, all right, do I have the people on the team aligned perfectly with the right tasks, even though they may or may not want to do the task, right? Because using a sports analogy, every once in a while, your center wants to be the guard and dribble it down, right?
Yeah.
And occasionally that's okay. But for the most part, they can't play the guard position the whole game, right? So we got to make sure that they're playing in those positions based off of their skill sets to do that, regardless of what they think they should be doing, because otherwise it hurts the rest of the team. So
I want to throw something out there, and I don't want to deviate from what you're saying. So if you've got more that you want to hit on that point, okay. So I have a philosophy that I live by, and I believe that every manager or leader should live by, and that is anyone who fails under you. If you have oversight, and I don't care how far it's removed, I don't care if it's a direct oversight or if it's several layers down. You know, you're the CEO and you've got, upper management that oversees middle management that oversees, everyday employees. If that everyday employee screws up, a portion of that fault falls on the CEO. And, right now, if you guys are managers, if you have any sort of oversight, take ownership of that. And say, okay, any mistake that is made. And a lot of people, I see this, there's like, well, that guy's just a bad apple. I mean, how could we see that he was going to be, terrible? And I'm like, who hired him? Okay, maybe you inherited, maybe you got promoted to, now you're a department head or, and you inherited this team, but who's putting the policies in place? Who's allowing the culture to permeate? Right. Who's got the checks and balances to make sure that if you have bad apples, we're taking care of them as quickly as possible. And so I think when it comes to accountability, we're very apt to blame other people and be like, well, he didn't give me the right information. He got this to me late, not my fault. I'm like, yes, your fault. Because if you oversee that position, part of it is your fault. Always.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you were saying that, it reminded me, because I wanted to talk about professional development and accountability, because so often, and we could go down this rabbit hole, and maybe we will. We'll see where it goes. But when we hire someone and we promote someone into positions, professional development is huge in making sure that they retain high skill sets in what they're doing.
Yeah.
And too often we forget that that's important. And so we want to hold them accountable, but yet we haven't done anything to improve their skill set in doing those tasks. Even if they're on a professional level, for instance, an attorney doesn't get better if they're not actually studying law.
Right.
They can try to counsel people all day long, but eventually if they're not staying up on law, reading new cases, understanding what's going on, how did this judge rule on this, their skill sets eventually get poor. And as an attorney, they become, less valuable, and people will start to recognize that. Well, the same thing happens all the time with employees, not just, skill sets that might be manual, but also mental.
Well, so here's the interesting thing, and I don't know that too many people realize that this happens. I don't care what field you're in. I mean, you talked about law, we could talk about tech, we could talk about inventory management, we could talk about accounting. I don't care what field you're in. It is constantly experiencing a half-life. So I'm going to use the example of a new grad. So you get someone fresh out of college. They have just spent the last 4 years, 6 years, however long, it took them to get their degree, just being immersed with information and best practices and best theory. And so when you hire them, they've got all this knowledge. Well, depending on what field they're in, after a year, they have lost half of that knowledge. And I mean, obviously I'm using arbitrary numbers. Maybe it's after 2 years, but so after a year, they've lost half of that knowledge. A year later, they've lost another half of that knowledge. Right. A year later, they've lost another half of that knowledge. So 3 years into it, they're only retaining, if you follow the math on that, 16% of what they had in college, unless you're refreshing that.
That's right.
And so, if you have a year half-life, after 3 years, you're at 16% unless there's this constant ongoing. Now, that makes sense when you're talking about, someone who's fresh out of college, but we don't realize that, okay, so, I've got a mechanic shop and, someone transferred from a competing shop over to my shop. Well, they brought a skill set over when they transferred. But if I'm not developing anything, they have a half-life. So it's not just education, it's also expertise and you see it where, this guy, he's a great mechanic, but he can't work on any cars that are, it's like, has to be at least a decade old for me to work on it.
Has
or
to
else
have a carburetor still. Can't be fuel injected.
Yeah, it's like,
Fine if we're in that market. But that's a great point because I know that through studies, on average, about half of employers right now will say that they can't find skilled labor.
Yeah.
Okay. But we also know that half of any organization or businesses out there, half of them don't have a active skill development, a skill training
program,
professional program either. Do you think there's a correlation? Probably.
Right.
Yeah. So you need to be looking at that as well, because if you're missing those two things, you can hold accountable people all day long, but you're not changing the system, so you're never going to get different results.
Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, so if you're holding people accountable to the same thing year after year after year after year, all they're going to do is learn the loopholes and how to play the game. They'll be like, I need to make sure to get this much done so that I don't get bad marks on my annual review. I think annual reviews are terrible. Like, if you're waiting a full year to tell someone good job or to make a change, wow. Yeah. And I'm not opposed to someone who wants to do, take, and it could be annual where it's like, okay, we're going to compile everything, but if you're not talking to your guys weekly, every other week, at least
monthly, at the very least,
I'm even giving it every other week. I think monthly is too infrequent. Okay. But if you're not talking to your guys regularly, and then you try to do an annual review, no. Like, no one should ever walk into an annual review and be surprised. Like, an annual review should just say, you already know this, let's just document it. That's what we're doing right here, is we're documenting.
Right.
And so, when you look at accountability, if I'm trying to make someone accountable and I wait for a year.
Well, and the problem is, and I've lived by this saying for a long time, that frustration comes from unmet expectations.
Yeah.
Okay. And unmet expectations come from a lack of communication. So the problem is when you drag that out a whole year, the frustration is built because they haven't been meeting the expectations, but it's so much harder to address it when you have that much baggage now than when it happens. And so I agree with you that frequent is much better, because if you have a dilemma, it's easier to talk about it, fix it now, why it's active. We can all see the moving parts, what we need to fix, than in a year from now to say, yeah, you're getting poor reviews because you haven't been performing.
Yeah.
Well, why haven't you said something?
So this is my management style, and I'm not advocating that everyone needs to do this, but I think it's worth sharing because there's some value here. If I ever directly oversee someone, one of the things that I will always tell them is I say, I will let you know if ever I have a problem, and I will not delay. Like, if I have a problem, you will know within 24 hours. I guess there is Friday to Monday, but I will let you know as soon as possible that I have a problem. And I let them know that because there's a lot of times people are out there just like, yeah, I don't know if I'm doing a good job or not. And the reason why I focus on letting them know if there's problems or being very clear about the problems is because I have seen so many times businesses that they've done. This is an extreme case, but I know a business that had an employee in the morning, praised that employee for doing a great job, in the afternoon, fired them for poor performance.
Really?
Yeah, because they didn't want to, like, they wanted, so, okay, there's a lot of companies that fire on Friday afternoons. Personally, I don't agree with that. I look at it and I'm just like, if you've got a problem, no one should ever be surprised that they're getting fired.
Right.
No one,
Right.
like, you should sit down and say, hey, you knew this was coming. We're going to let you go because we've already talked to you about the concerns that we have.
Totally agree.
This crap of, sneaking it in on a Friday afternoon, I think that's a bad, antiquated management technique. So anyway, in this example, the company wanted to do the Friday afternoon. And so they basically lied to the employee Friday morning because they were afraid of the employee like making a scene or causing an issue. And so they wanted to stage everything. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, think about this for a second. If you're so nervous that an employee is going to make a scene, this is, months, if not years of poor management that you have allowed. And now you're trying to just get rid of this problem as quickly as possible. Like, that's really bad management, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think we just offended a whole bunch of people.
No. Maybe, who cares?
That's true. It is what it is. Like, if you're offended that you have an antiquated bad management practice that you want to hold on to, find another podcast to stroke your ego. Well, okay, I'm going to settle down because I'm getting harsh right now. I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, I do want to go back and look just for a minute, go a little bit deeper on a comment that you made when you talked about, if something goes wrong, as a leader, as a manager, I have some responsibility in that. And I like that concept because I find that if you look at any, matter of fact, probably all successes, when you look at all successes that have been significant at any level, it wasn't a single individual.
Correct.
Okay, it's great inventions are their teams, multiple people. Even when you look at great things, Sherlock Holmes, he still had a Watson, right?
Right.
There was still someone else that was engaged that allowed him to be successful.
That's why I have an Ethan.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. I'm glad to be a Robin any day of the week. Because you're the one who gets shot at all the time and not me. So I like that idea and that concept that we need to make sure that we keep the team focus, that we're building a team and we're building our players on that team and we're trying to develop them. Because as we do that, it's easier to hold each other accountable because we know that we're in this together. Mm-hmm. But when you start getting into that singular, you, I, we, independence, and it's interesting because everyone says, can you work independent? Well, yeah, but 90% of the time I have to work with other people. So, that needs to be a critical piece as well. So I really think that as you're looking at accountability, think on a bigger picture that, we have a team, not necessarily singular, because it's, I even think back to grade school, think of the times through your elementary education that one individual, does something stupid. And what does the teacher do? Penalizes the whole class, right? I paid the price. No, that one individual, right? But that's frustrating. But if it would have been done in a productive way, instead of penalizing everyone for someone else's mistake or for that one individual's mistake, see, all of a sudden now you create that, hey, I don't want to be part of a team. I don't want to be anything anymore. So it's kind of counterintuitive because of how we've done it. But when you get into a professional development, you can't have success without people around you.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Well, and I think I want to hit on something. Actually, I want to hit on two things that you talked about. The first thing that I want to hit on is if you want to optimize your accountability, you as the manager, you as the owner should be the last person who has to do accountability. Like the team, the coworkers should actually be enforcing accountability before it ever gets to you. And that's something that you should strive for, like, you want the type of culture where if someone is being lazy, the employees are saying, dude, we work here. Like, don't be lazy. Not the other way where they're just like, oh, well, if he's not working, I'm not working.
Right.
And so it's hard as a manager. You got to have some thick skin, and you've got to be able to look inside and say, am I doing a bad job? Everyone who gets into management automatically assumes that they're a good manager. I wouldn't have gotten here if I wasn't good. I'm like, no, there's a lot of bad managers. We've all had to work for bad managers or seen bad managers. Like, we see a lot of bad management, but yet everyone thinks they're a good manager. Like, you're not.
Well, and that's the right, there's a Greek word, hubris, which is, overconfident, just over, your self-aggrandizement is great. Anyways, it's a Greek word, hubris, but I like that a lot of times as managers, we have to check that at the door, that ego. We have to check it at the door, because if it gets into you, it actually will be destructive through the organization.
Oh, yeah, because you wield a lot of influence.
Right.
And so, are you asking your employees, hey, what do you like that I do? What do you dislike that I do? And if they tell you, oh, everything's good,
you're a liar.
Yeah, like, there are problems,
Yeah. And maybe it is true, but going back to your earlier premise that if you're having conversations with them frequently, you know that, right?
Yeah. Like, you, again, shouldn't be surprised at what they're telling you. Like, well, I get a little frustrated when this happens. Okay, I know it. I need to work on it. Or, as a manager, if you've been working on something for 6 months, have a report card, a report system, whether that's you're looking at like financial metrics, or you're going and talking to employees and saying, okay, over the last 6 months, I've been trying to have more effective meetings. Do you feel like our meetings have improved?
Right.
And they're like, you've been working on that for 6 months?
Okay, I got some work to do.
Yeah, So I do want to go back to something that you hit on. So team accountability, super important. Strive for that, and when you get there, man, it feels good. It feels so good. But the other thing that you mentioned, and that is use accountability to build people. So often we use it as the beating stick. You didn't get this done. You made a mistake, and we threaten people, even if it's a passive-aggressive threatening, where it's like, well, if you do that again, we'll all be out of business because,
Well, but that's the authoritarian attitude. Do this or.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. And so how do we look at accountability as a way to build? Because your best employees will make mistakes. In fact, your best employees will likely make more mistakes because they're going to be in positions that are difficult.
Right.
Like, if all my job is I just have to, stock the shelves, I'm not going to make a lot of mistakes because, okay, labels are forward facing, that's kind of an entry level position. But if my job is to try and determine what inventory is going to sell and what inventory needs to be discounted and when to run a holiday promo and what type of social media we need to push on and what our marketing budget should be, oh my gosh, this is really complicated. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. So when that top employee makes a mistake, how are you building either them or yourself or the company or everything? You look at it, you're like, okay, we ran a holiday promo last year. It bombed. What did we learn from that? Right. And then that's a form of accountability, is to say, we ran a holiday, not you ran a holiday promo that bombed. We ran a holiday promo that bombed. What did we learn from that? What are we going to do this year?
So this topic came from an article I had read by a Darren Finkelstein. Mm-hmm. And if I got his last name wrong, sorry, Darren, please be a little bit forgiving, because your last name was as bad as my last name. So
at least you're both in the same boat. So
yeah, we're friends now because of last names. But chasing a squirrel before I get into one thing, I found it really cool that something that we preach in our customer service, which is when you get into sales and customer service is doing what you say you're going to do. Well, his definition of accountability is doing what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
So I was like, high five. We're on the same page on that one. But so he brings up the idea that as owners and managers, supervisors, that our employees have to be able to see and know that we're working as hard, if not harder than them, right? That doesn't mean necessarily physically, but we have to be engaged, smarter, harder, etc. Okay, if they think that they're working harder than their supervisor, pretty soon you lose that respect, and now it makes it hard for that supervisor to hold them accountable because why are you holding me accountable? You don't work as hard as I am. You're lazy. You make mistakes, whatever else. So you got to make sure that your efforts are at least equivalent to what they are. Otherwise, that respect level shifts, and then the accountability can't be done.
There's been a lot of books and different things about leading and this idea of leading from the front as opposed to leading from the rear.
That's what's one of his is lead by example.
And so as you're talking about this, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, this to me is a lead from the front concept of saying, don't ask someone to do something you're not willing to do. Don't expect them to work harder than you're willing to work. Yes, there are different roles, and so hard work. There were some air quotes there for anyone listening, but hard work is subjective as to what actually hard work is. But carrying your own weight, being a team player, all those factors.
Yeah, another one that I liked that he brought out was discipline. That ability to just stick with a project and grind through it, which I know from other studies that I've read, and I think we even might have had a podcast on it, but they tracked kids, trying to keep it as short as possible. They tracked kids to see.
Yeah, we did a podcast.
They were there to the end, and it ultimately came down to the ones that were more successful had the ability to grind it out.
Yeah.
Right? Stick with a task, even when it wasn't that great. So anyways, that's one that he brings out as well, is that if you are flipping about, let's just give it up and not worry about it. If you don't have that discipline to grind it out and to stick with stuff, especially when you're trying to implement new programs, employees see that, and then it's hard to build that growth and trust as well. Now, this one was super interesting because he brings up the word integrity, but he used a definition that I hadn't read before, even though it fits in line with all the other definitions of integrity, and that is that when making things right when they go bad. Integrity is making things right when they go bad.
Okay.
And I really like that definition.
I really like that too.
Because too often that's, and funny enough, about the same time I read some of this, when, you read some layoffs and, CEOs are like, we're sorry about it and we got to lay some people off. But I feel horrible. Really, trust me, I feel horrible, right?
That hurts me more than it hurts you.
Right. But as I'm thinking about what he said, I'm like, yeah, but it's just lip language.
Lip service.
Yeah, lip service is a better, thank you. Because you didn't try to do anything to make it right. Yeah. At least not that I could read in some of the things I read, that it wasn't, hey, look, you know what? We've made some severance packages. We're doing other things because, we've just... During COVID, we hired too many, and now that things have equalized back out, we don't need the help, et cetera. I like that definition that he brought up about when, making things right when they go bad.
Yeah.
So I really think that is an important principle. If you're going to hold people accountable, they need to know that if things aren't going to turn out right, that you're still going to do everything in your power, not just verbally, but through other means, monetary, physically, whatever it might be, to make things right. No, so great principle.
I really like that principle. Gives me something to think about.
The last one, and we've covered a lot of this one, so I won't, but he said just that part of accountability is about improving, not just our employees, but ourselves too, that we need to be actively building our skill set and things like that. Because when people think about it, when you're around someone who says, I just finished my 4th book this year, you're kind of like, I better at least read a book, right? Right? Or, hey, I just climbed XY hill over the weekend, and you're like, I probably should get out and hike more, right?
Yeah.
So when you're around people who are always improving and trying to better themselves, okay, and if it's done right, not in a bragging way. It's inspiring, and it wants us to improve as well. It inspires us to improve. So I like that idea that as leaders, we need to be improving ourselves and promoting it softly as a way to say, hey, look, I want you to be improving. Now, giving them opportunities is important as well, and we've talked about that earlier, but I like that idea that improvement breeds improvement.
Yeah. No, I think that's excellent. So I have one that I want to add to the list. I know it wasn't in his article, but I think that this is really important. There has to be a level of trust before there can be a level of accountability.
Oh, yes.
And that trust has to go both ways. So you as the manager, the owner, CEO, whatever position you're holding, you have to trust that when your employees come to you and say, sorry, it didn't happen, that they are actually, apologizing. I see too many people that, like they will not accept an apology. An apology is almost a sign of weakness to them.
Right.
And I'm like, well, not everything goes the way that you want it to. And there are many times where an employee keeps apologizing. In the back of your mind, you're like, are they just lazy? Are they just making excuses? And if there's not some mutual trust, it's impossible to know what is really going on. But by adding that element of trust, then you can better know what's going on. And then, driving the car the other direction, having the two-way road, if the employee, if they don't trust the manager or the owner, then any accountability, and I mentioned this earlier, it becomes a game. They're looking for loopholes. They're like, well, I just got to tell him what he wants to hear because I don't trust that, he is really, like he's just looking out for himself. He's not looking out for the interests of the company or the employees. And so there really has to be that level of trust there to make sure that, that this accountability is happening and is meaningful.
Yeah. And I guess probably my closing thoughts to kind of support what you're doing is, and we had mentioned this in an earlier podcast as well, is that business is a process of trial and error.
Yeah.
It's not always about getting it right. It's nice when we do, but a lot of it's about being better at being wrong. And so holding people accountable, knowing that if we have a level of our culture that is about being better at being wrong, then when things don't turn out perfect, we're not devastating, just trying to destroy our employees and beat them down, because we realize, look, if we want you to be innovative and doing things, there's going to be a level of that you're going to fail.
Yeah.
And so having this culture of that some level of failure is acceptable in our process of trial and error really allows us to be better at holding people accountable in a healthy way.
Yeah. So, no, I love that. I'm gonna have my closing thought here, not to get the last word in. I feel bad because I'm like, trust could have been my closing thought.
I started to introduce the program. I get to close it out.
So. Oh, okay. So I will have the pre-closing thought, and then you get the closing thought. No, I think at the end of the day, put people above profits. And,
Agreed.
If you're looking at accountability, what are you being accountable to? Human beings, like treat people like people, put people above profits. When people work for you, they are wanting to do a good job. Most people actually want to grow the company, but they also want to grow themselves. And, all too often when we start looking at accountability, like this is a big complaint with Wall Street is, the company becomes more accountable to the shareholders than it does to the customers or the employees. And it can drive a business under. And as a small business, we have this advantage where we're not driven by shareholders, and we can do things that Wall Street doesn't permit. We get to put our priorities on people over profits. And so I just think if we're talking about accountability, people over profits. That's what I'm going to say.
I love that so much that I'm not even going to add anything else to it. We're going to close. We're going to close on that because that is fantastic advice, and I appreciate you putting that in there because I think we forget that too often as we're trying to pad our pockets.
Yeah,
which is not a bad thing. I don't think that's bad, but certainly if you're like you've suggested, putting people over profits. So, well, thank you for being with us today on another episode of Marketing Management and Money. If you have thoughts or ideas, reach out to Ryan at ryan@marketingmanagementandmoney.com. Did I get it right?
Well, close. There's no and in there. It's just marketingmanagementmoney.com. But it's not a .org or, a dot.
We're on multiple platforms. You find us on YouTube and Instagram as well. So search us out there. We're going to continue we have some other great thoughts and ideas as we've thought about episodes going into this 2024 year of things that we're seeing and trends that we're finding in the business world. So we look forward to giving you more great information as you join us in future episodes. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.